understandably, there's been quite a focus on the decision to pick Richard Ofori as Ghana's number one for this tournament. So I'm going to try and sort of give a bit of an idea about how I view Ofori, and then also then sort of some of the background to why I described picking him ahead of Laurent Zati as bizarre before the tournament started. But basically, Richard Ofori, what is he as a goalkeeper? I think I can describe him as an okay line goalkeeper. Distribution, let's kind of knock that on the head first, is poor. It's inaccurate, particularly poor under pressure, and really kind of inconsistent and volatile. And volatile is a word that I'll probably use quite often during this. But yeah, his distribution is poor, and I think that has ultimately seen Ghana struggle to find solutions against teams that press them, because when teams press you, your goalkeeper becomes a very valuable player in the build-up because of his ability to be that free man and then also find the free man consistently as a passer, give you platforms to start to attack from, go over the press. He can't do that. He's also not really a sweeper, not someone who does a huge amount of shot prevention work coming off his line and kind of sweeping balls behind the defence. That's not really a strength of his, and when he does do it, he's volatile. He makes some very bad decisions when he does that, but also will have some good moments, but he doesn't do it very often, and when he does, it's the inconsistency is clear. Shot prevention work from crosses is a bit better. He is certainly more active at coming out and trying to punch crosses, but again, very, very volatile. And we saw that yesterday, in fact. I think once he basically denied Mozambique what would have been a point-blank header by coming off and kind of punching, which was pretty excellent. And then on the other side, basically, nearly gave them 2 goals flapping at corners. And then on the goal, the sort of the second goal, the ball was just running out of play. And I don't know why, but he just decided he had to go and get it and touched it. Honestly, I can't really explain it. But that's that kind of volatility in his decision-making in using his penalty area. And then there's the shot-stopping. And his shot-stopping style, goalkeepers have different shot-stopping styles. Some of them are very kind of active coming off their line. An example, or a couple of examples in a Ghanaian context, Ibrahim Danlad, very, very active in terms of coming off his line and trying to spread himself and narrow the angles. Laurent Zati is another one who tends to come off his line quite a lot. Now that has its pros and its cons. People talk about narrowing angles, but it also reduces your reaction time, and means that maybe shots that are from longer range that aren't necessarily that well angled or that well struck or that well directed and that well struck actually end up beating you in goal, because although you've narrowed the angle, you've actually reduced your reaction time. So there's a kind of a positive and a negative side of that. Ofori's on the other side of the spectrum, where he tends to stay much more on his goal line. Positives of that being, if it's poorly struck and poorly directed, he tends to be pretty well positioned to deal with it, and I think we saw that this tournament. But if it's fairly well struck and well directed, then firstly the angle he's got to cover quite a big amount of ground because of the angles, but that then exacerbates what has been a decline in his explosiveness since his injuries. We saw for the first Cape Verde goal how that manifested. He was very flat-footed. Normally goalkeepers kind of pulse their feet just as shots are about to come, because that sort of sets them up to then be explosive and then dive. And then the other thing that he did was he used a technique called the negative step technique. And if you imagine this is the goalkeeper, and this is sort of the side that the ball's flat. Sorry, it was going to his right, so this is his right foot. And as the striker shoots, if the ball is to your right from long range, ideally you want to take a power step with your right foot and then dive, because that takes you closer to the ball and then you power off it. But if you're a goalkeeper who lacks explosiveness, you use a different technique, and that's called the negative step. And that's what he does is to actually get down more quickly, because he's not got the explosiveness to do the power and jump. He takes a negative step, which he actually steps under his body with his right foot and then goes down. And that, as you can see, the difference between doing this and going this way and then that and going that way is the complete difference in the reach. And we saw that for that first goal against Cape Verde. And we've seen that a couple of other times. In fact, the disallowed goal against Egypt was another one where he kind of flopped rather than being explosive. And that's something that's happened since his injuries. And that's where we're in this situation now where he hasn't really played club football consistently since 2019-20, basically. His last full club season was 2019-20. He played 10 games in the following 2 seasons and then hasn't played at all this season. So he's basically played 20 games in 3 years, 6 games on average a year, not at all this season. And that's not by accident. That's not just because he's been injured and hasn't got back into the team. He's not got back into the team because he's clearly suffered a material decline in his quality as a goalkeeper. You can sort of make up with some of the volatility that he had in terms of his shot prevention work, in terms of his work from crosses, from sweeping, and then also his shot stopping volatility, because that was there because of technical issues as well. But now that his explosiveness has dropped off, such that his shot stopping volatility, rather from having kind of highs and lows like this, still has lows, but the highs are lower. So it's more like that. And he's got more competition than he had before. There's just no real logical reason for him being the goalkeeper, especially as he's not playing. And that decision, as I said, was bizarre. There was no logical footballing reason for it, and I think the leadership thing as well, it is pretty questionable. I think he wasn't a settling presence for the defence, it didn't seem, and I think his post-match interview after the Egypt game was a bit weird, and I didn't think was especially captain-like. A lot of blame for his teammates, didn't really look at himself, focused on himself a lot, but there was no introspection. It was very much projection onto his teammates. And so, yeah, I think it's bizarre. And for all those reasons. And that decision to pick him as a number one has ultimately ended up costing Ghana, which is a sort of shame because I appreciate he's been a kind of good servant, but I also, there's something kind of going on there that's very, very strange. And I struggle to have sympathy for the players sometimes in those situations because I think he's kind of part of the system in many ways and part of the strangeness. And so it's kind of, in some ways, it's sort of self-imposed as well. So, yeah, very strange, very poor decision, I thought, and it's for all those reasons.